Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. Now, today is going to be a continuation of the plant review series, and this is for a plant that I was surprised a lot of people wanted a review for. And this plant is right behind me here, which is my Nepenthes, or my pitcher plant, or monkey jaws, I think is another way of saying it. I will bring it up and show you closer throughout the video. But before we get into that, let's put down some ground rules. So for everybody that's coming back, welcome back. You know that you can find your favorite chapter down below on the progress bar. And for all the newbies that are joining, welcome to the slight insanity that is the plant review series. Now, I'll say that what I always say during these videos, which is there is no way for me to make this review video unbiased. That's the whole point of it being a review. It's my experience with my specific plant in my conditions, which is growing in the UK in a conservatory, and whatever that might mean in terms of cold, in terms of warmth, in terms of light, in terms of lack of light, all, all of the above. So just bear that in mind when you're kind of hearing my opinions about this plant and what it's been like for me to grow this plant. What I do encourage you, if you've already got this plant, however, is to add your own review down below. The good, the bad, the ugly, talk a bit more about your conditions, because essentially think about what you would like to see in a review from somebody else. So you'd want to know kind of what light levels they're getting, the frequency of watering, any other kind of parameters that that individual might be finding useful when growing that plant, or things that maybe haven't worked. Both of these things have got value, and that's why I always liked, as much as possible within at least my reviews, to give you both the good and the bad, because you can learn as much from the bad as you can from the good, and vice versa. But yeah, without further ado, let's go into the first topic. Okay, some background on this plant, and I will show you the plant now so you can see. I'll bring it up closer. The people in the know why I am looking up. Also, if I'm sounding a bit bunged up, I do apologize during this video. I am still recovering from COVID. I had a fun Christmas of being stuck indoors with COVID. It is now New Year's Day, so I'd start the day with some filming. And I'm still a bit bunged up, but I'm over the worst of the fever and all of that jazz. If anybody's curious, it wasn't that bad for me this time around. It was even easier the last time around. So I've been quite fortunate. So I'm not going to complain really. But yes, so this plant usually sits right behind me. A lot of people that have been here for some of the previous videos have seen my head bounce off this quite a few times. So you might be able to see some of the pictures I have cut off, but they still exist. And I'll show you the full length of this plant. It's actually quite tall. So the story behind the background of this plant is that I got this from a regular garden center. One of my regular garden centers. Some people that have been around for a while will know that I've got a really decent garden center that does have some slightly harder to find plants in there. So I found that in there. They usually have some form of a Nepenthes available. Usually not this time of the year, not usually when it's this cold. They usually bring them out around spring and summer. So I'm assuming that's when they're probably pushed a bit more from the actual nurseries in the Netherlands, which I'm assuming is where most of the kind of garden centers and plant shops in Europe and the UK get their plants predominantly from. So, and it kind of makes sense because, and I'll talk a bit more throughout the video on this, this isn't a plant that tends to have a lot of active growth during the winter. Interestingly, this year it has. So, and hopefully the video will have how long I've had this plant for. It's either been a year or two at this point. And I have done another video, and I'll kind of pop it at the top there. When I first got this and talking a bit more about my experiences with it, I didn't know anything about this. I'd had a bit of a foray into kind of carnivorous plants in the form of the usual kind of Venus flytrap, some Drosera as well, which is really cool. Top tip, if you haven't seen any of my other videos and you are struggling with fungus gnats or those things that look a bit like fruit flies that are buzzing around some of your plants because they're a bit too wet, invest in a Drosera. I think it's a Drosera. No, Drosera will do the same thing, but pingiculars. So I've had pingiculars or pinguiculars. I'm pretty sure I'm mispronouncing that either way. Pinguiculars, and I think the pinguiculars are also called butterworts as well. And the Droseras are really, really cool, especially if you've got it in a really sunny bit, because it's a bit that has those droplets of liquid on kind of little tendrils. And it does, I have had that before, and it does work with fungus gnats. Not as well as it will do with the regular kind of household flies, because it does need to get triggered in order for it to, something to stick on it, and then it will kind of digest it, basically. And I think that's it. Oh, and I want to say pitcher plants, but yes, pincher plants. These are the monkey jars pitcher plants, which is Sarracenias, if I'm not mistaken. So I've had a lot of the common types of carnivorous plants that you can get from most plant stores relatively readily in most areas, I would say. This is one that you do occasionally get. Maybe it's a bit less common to find than some of the others that I just mentioned. However, and I think it's because there's this kind of slight notion that this plant is quite a difficult one to grow, which is what I thought. And I will give you my experiences with this plant throughout this video as to whether or not that was accurate. Now, I would be remiss in this background section if I did not mention that I didn't know, other than the fact that this was a Nepenthes, I didn't know what species of Nepenthes this was. And I had a very, very kind Instagram follower who's been with me for a very, very long time, who is absolutely lovely, who mentioned what this is probably going to be, because that's the most common type of Nepenthes that's available, and I think it's a ventrata or something like that. The title will have the full name. I still just call this my pitcher plant because I've only got one. So, but yeah, I think that's enough about background. Let's go into the next topic. One last thing before I close off the background section is I cannot talk about Nepenthes without mentioning red leaf exotics. I think that's what it's called. And I cannot remember the name of the person who runs the business and the Instagram account. I think there might be a YouTube channel as well. I will put details at the top there. The fundamental and most quintessential knowledge point, I think, for a lot of Nepenthes, for everybody out there, I am a huge fan of both the company and the individual that runs the company. Very, very, very cool. And if you ever want to see anybody get super excited about Nepenthes, check out their socials, Instagrams, all of these things. So speed of growth on this one is interesting because I didn't have anything to benchmark this against, and I'm also obviously trying to not decapitate this plant whilst I hold it. And if I was smart, I might be able to get this. Give me a second, and with some editing, I might get some magic to kind of truss this up in a way that I don't have to keep holding it, which will be great. And like magic, I do like a good DIY with some like janky plant ties. Great. Means that I have to hold it and I can talk to you a bit easier. But yes, speed of growth of this one, it was an interesting one because, again, I didn't have preconceived notions about this plant because I've never really grown one before. So I didn't know an awful lot. So I did do a lot of research because it was a plant that I did want to eventually add to my collection. I'd heard a lot of things about it, them being tricky. Again, I will mention that a lot of the research that I was doing was also helped by a lot of the content that Red Leaf Exotics were bringing out as well. So I kind of had an idea of how I wanted to set things up. And the one thing I will say is, in terms of its speed, this is quite fast. And you saw how tall the plant was in itself when I showed you earlier on in the background section. It can get quite tall. But the thing that I don't think a lot of people realize about this plant, it is kind of a vine, really. So when you first get it, it's usually quite short, compact, and it's kind of all spilling over, but it will grow up. So I don't know whether or not you might be able to see, and I'll talk about this in accessories, but there are janky support sticks in with the Nepenthes. And it has been relatively fast. I will say the first summer that I've got it, so maybe I have had it for 2 years actually now. Yeah, probably coming up to 2 years, 2 summers. But This was one that after the first year, and it took a time to settle in, I also changed its growing media. I think it came in straight cocoa coir. I moved it into straight sphagnum moss in a net pot, but again, I'll talk about that in the accessories and care section. It took a beat, and yes, it did get some new pictures. Obviously, the one thing that everybody wants from this plant is pictures, and you will get the kind of tendrils happening without pictures sometimes, and you will get failed pictures, and I'll see if I can add little clips in throughout the video to give you close-ups of what I mean. But that's fine as well, and generally what will happen is, at least this has been my experience, is you will still get foliar growth, so leaves, that are happening in the wintertime as well, in what would theoretically be classed as its dormancy period, and you will still get the tendril growing with the potential to have a picture at the end of it. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, the thing that really does kind of encourage the pictures is twofold, really. So it does need the kind of warmer days of the summer, but it also needs that kind of higher light level as well, or volume of light throughout the day. So obviously in the winter, the pictures won't form as readily or at all, basically. So you might get some leaves with, by the time that kind of, how do I describe this? You start off at so you've got loads of pictures that are happening throughout the summer. You move into autumn, you're still getting some leaves. You maybe get one or two pictures developing. You get more leaves with some of the tendrils on. Winter comes, the tendrils don't do very much. You might still get more leaves and more tendrils. And what will happen by the time spring comes around is that some of the newer leaves with the newer tendrils might get their pictures developing, but some of the ones, depending on how harsh the winter might have been, might not develop their pictures at all. The leaves will still be there, the tendrils will be there, but the developing pictures might just shrivel up. And it's kind of a rinse and repeat. At least that's been the case in my experience. But in terms of growth, speed of growth, if I was to benchmark this against the golden pothos, like I usually do, in the summer, if the golden pothos will get 2 or 3 leaves in a month, this might get 2 leaves in a month. Roughly, I would say. In the winter, it might get 1 leaf a month. So it slows down, but it doesn't stop entirely. At least it hasn't in my experience. So just something to bear in mind. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say about speed of growth. Let's move into the next topic. So ease of propagation with this one is an interesting one, and I'm going to be completely transparent here and say I have not tried to propagate this yet. However, from some of the research that I was doing, and I will show you a clip close up because you probably won't be able to see all the way from the distance there, and it's something I got super excited about a couple of weeks ago when I first saw this happen. I'm seeing another little Nepenthes starting at the very base, like a pup almost. I don't know, because I haven't done enough research to know whether or not Nepenthes do kind of form some form of a pup, or because it's a vine, whether or not a lower node that's within that sphagnum moss has activated and it's bringing out a branch, so to speak. So I'm assuming that's probably the one that's more likely, but very cool nonetheless. But yes, from some of the research that I was doing, the way that I can see that you can propagate these plants, and I did not know this, and I'm annoyed with myself for not knowing this because I probably would have tried it sooner, is you can actually take cuttings from the stem, as long as there's a node and a leaf, you can propagate. And at least from what I was seeing, I think you can propagate this in water. Damp sphagnum moss, I would assume you might be able to do it in perlite as well. I doubt you can do it in soil. However, with this specific Nepenthes, and when I was talking to that follower of mine on Instagram, they did say that a lot of the times they are sold in cocoa coir because out of a lot of the Nepenthes, this specific species is really quite forgiving and it will do okay even in cocoa coir. So, but yes, I would say generally water or maybe damp sphagnum moss. Damp sphagnum moss would probably be the preference there. You need to have a lot of humidity around the plant. And the same thing would apply, and this is one of the few plants that I have that gets watered with my reverse osmosis water, or Obviously, if you don't have a reverse osmosis system, if you don't have fish, a lot of people that have fish, a lot of people that do have fish still don't have reverse osmosis systems. You could use rainwater. Rainwater would be the easiest and the kind of the most free version out of all of these things. I think you can probably use distilled water, but as with a lot of carnivorous plants, they really are quite sensitive to the chemicals that might be found in tap water. So just something to bear in mind with this. But yeah, so it's one of the ones that does get babied in that respect. But to be fair, with a lot of your carnivorous plants, that would be the case as well. Like you would want to be not watering with tap water, more so than any other plant specifically, because with a lot of other plants, and the one that everybody's usually thinking of about not using tap water because they can be a bit fussy are the kind of prayer plants, calatheas, tonanthes, stramanthes, marantas, all of these things, because they can get crispy leaves because the chemicals or the salt deposits on the edge of the leaves, and you can get that crisping and browning. I'm pretty sure, maybe not with this one, but I'm pretty sure with a lot of the carnivorous plants, if you're constantly just watering it with tap water, and I'm not an expert, so I am sure people will probably correct me in the comments and do if I'm talking rubbish. I think it can do quite considerable damage to the plant rather than it just being cosmetic like it would be with the prayer plant family. So I always tend to stick to distilled water. I don't buy distilled water, but reverse osmosis water or rainwater for this, almost exclusively, basically. So moving into availability for this one, and as I mentioned earlier on, I got it in a garden center. You can probably find this in plant stores, some plant stores. You won't find this everywhere. Followers from the US or kind of anywhere that, I was going to say the US with big box stores, but even if we all don't have big box stores called big box stores, I think the UK's got their own version. Pretty sure Australia does. I'm pretty sure most countries probably do, I guess. But big box stores, have you ever found this in yours? Where you based? Because I don't think I've ever seen this specific one, at least in the big box stores in my area. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of followers from the UK going, oh no, you're talking rubbish. We've seen this down the road with us in one of the big box stores. I'm thinking B&Qs and home bases for the people in the UK. But yeah, definitely not one that you'll potentially ever find in something like a supermarket. Pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've never seen something like this in a supermarket. You might find a Venus flytrap in a supermarket. I don't think you will generally find this. But pricing-wise, this, I hazard to call this a common plant because you can probably find it if you just look, basically. You might not find it in front of you everywhere. So I'm thinking things that you can find everywhere now is a lot of the moth orchids. And why am I blocking on the actual name? It's not coming to me. I'll put it up there. I don't know why I'm remembering the common name and not the actual scientific name of moth orchids. But anyway, this is not one that you'll find as often as that because probably not as many people, it's not called pretty blooms and all these things, but I still think that its pictures are quite cool. And the one thing that I will say about this, and I don't know whether or not a lot of people know this, is some of the pitcher plants, they'll have the little lip as well. The ones that have got it fully open will usually, I think, at least in nature, be the ones that are allowing the rain to fall into the pitchers and fill them up a bit more. The ones that have got a lid that's quite heavily over the pitcher itself probably generate a lot of their own fluid. I don't know what else to call it, essentially. But I would say with these ones, they never get rained on and I never kind of shower the plant in any way or form, but they're almost always full, or at least partially full. Even the ones that I've taken the tops off, they have got some liquid in them. Yes, they do. So they do fill up on their own. And yes, I can confirm that I have dropped them on me a few times and the water is kind of like a sugary substance, basically. I don't think it would harm your skin necessarily, but yeah, it's quite sticky and yeah. So I'm not entirely sure about the biological processes that this plant does, whether or not there's digestive enzymes already within the liquid, or whether or not it's smart enough and it's got receptors that only when something falls into the picture do those digestive enzymes go in, and whether or not just in its purest form before anything drops in, it's just like a sugary substance to kind of promote the insects going in, basically. But yeah, in terms of availability, you can kind of find it. In terms of price, I'm trying to think back on how much I paid for mine. Probably high single digits to very, very low double digits, maybe, at least in my area. And I know, and I'm thinking about Red Leaf Exotics again, and a lot of other places that do carry specialists, kind of hybrid pitcher plants or Nepenthes, they can cost a pretty penny. There's certain ones that are quite cool. They look a bit like they've got fangs, or they're entirely black, or they're entirely red, and they're small, or they're huge, and there's all these things. All of those different Nepenthes species or hybrids can get more pricey. The kind of standard one, which I'm pretty sure is the ventrata, or this specific Nepenthes, which again, I'll have the name on the title, is a bit easier to find, which is cool because actually gives people a bit of an introduction and then see if they maybe want to venture into some of the more expensive, possibly slightly more fussy pitcher plants. Now, pests with this one, and this is an interesting one because you wouldn't assume that they would be pests with this one. And I will say, so far, I have not had any. I'm trying to think whether or not maybe once there was spider mites on this. Maybe, but that was pretty much it. And I don't know whether or not a lot of people are aware of this. I don't know, I've not had an inflorescence on this one yet. But if I am benchmarking this against some of the other carnivorous plants, and I don't know whether or not all of you have grown carnivorous plants at one point or another, the interesting thing that a lot of those plants will do when they bloom is that their bloom is considerably higher than where the actual trap is, which kind of makes sense because they still need pollinators to pollinate the bloom. And if the bloom isn't high enough and away from the trap itself, they kind of messing it up for themselves, really. So that's very, very cool. And also a lot of the carnivorous plants have got very cool smelling and cool looking flowers. I don't think I've ever looked into what the Nepenthes ones might look like, but I'm assuming they might be interesting as well. They might not be, and I'm probably going to correct myself up here. But yeah, this is not a plant that generally will suffer too much from pest pressures. At least it hasn't in my experience. Moving into care and kind of accessories for this one. And I will take this down and bring it in and show you a bit closer as well. So you might be able to see janky support sticks for the win. And I've had to extend the support stick because it's getting a bit much. And I'll see if I can show you now closer up whether or not I'll be able to move everything out of the way. Can you see that little growth point there? That's the one that I was talking about in the other section of the video, where I'm talking about the fact that there might be a pup or it might be branching out. And the other thing that you might notice is that I have got this in a net pot, and I am also growing it in just damp sphagnum moss. Now, the care for this is where it gets a bit interesting. And let me put this up again and I'll talk about its care a bit more. So the care, as I was mentioning in other sections of the video, obviously you're going to need, the water is going to be really specific with this. So whether or not you're going to use distilled water, reverse osmosis water, or tap water, those would be the ones that I would suggest. If somebody out there that's watching this video has got a lot of experience with the Nepenthes plants and they can categorically say that is rubbish, you can use tap water all the time, please do let us know in the comments down below. I would like to know that as well. But yeah, it is one that would need that. It doesn't need to be fertilized. It will catch its own food. If it doesn't catch its own food, it is also okay. Again, I don't know whether or not this is help or not, but on the occasion, if I kill a fly in the house, I will drop it in one of these pitchers. Do not do that with your Venus flytrap because it takes a lot of energy for those traps to close, and they prefer live prey, if I'm not mistaken. That could easily stress out your Venus flytrap, I think anyway. It's been a while since I had a Venus flytrap, and interestingly enough, I binned the Venus flytrap after it was doing exceptionally well after a while, and I kind of got the care pat. But at that point, I didn't know that sometimes they pretty much look like they're entirely dead and they're just going dormant for the winter to only come back again in the summer. And I may have very well been the plant that I cared for a long time, thinking I had killed it. Would I try it again? Probably not, because I just don't have the space or the willingness or the energy to devote that much care for it. But you know, it was an experience, and yeah, just an extra bit of research would have helped me know that. But yes, the other thing. So obviously the water is another thing. And I'll get onto the net pot, and I'll talk about the difference between the Nepenthes and most other, the ones that I've mentioned before, the Droseras, the Pinguiculas, the Venus flytraps, all of these other carnivorous plants, the Sarracenias, the pitcher plants, all of these other kind of carnivorous plants tend to be bog plants. So they more or less almost like to be sitting in kind of heavily moist media all the time, basically. This, if I'm not mistaken, is still part of, and I'll correct myself at the top, I think this is part of the aroid family. Or if it isn't, it is a plant that grows like an aroid. So it will grow like an orchid. So it would be nooks and crannies and things like that on trees. It wants air to its roots, whilst a lot of the other ones that I was just mentioning don't have the same requirement. They still like some air, but not to the same level as this. So that is why it is in a net pot. That is also why it is in damp sphagnum moss. And yeah, I mean, that's the big thing that I think is worth noting about this. And obviously it vines. And that was a game changer when I found that out, because you only ever see it when you're looking at the shops in a very kind of compact format. But actually, I'm really enjoying the fact that it vines. It's kind of cool. I don't know, I've never let it kind of flop down and grow that way, but I would imagine the way that it would vine, and I think it does want to wrap around something, is that it would wrap slowly around something as it vines, because there's no tendrils coming out or anything like that. But I don't know, I've not seen enough pictures of this probably in nature to be able to say, but very, very cool plant nonetheless. But yeah, as I said, certain bits of idiosyncrasies. The one thing that this does mean for the care of this plant, and this is one of the key points that I really want you to take away from this, is a high maintenance plant in terms of how often you're going to want to water it. So I'll give you an example in my conditions. So in my conditions in the summer, regular summer day in here, this gets watered, and by watered, I will take the whole thing out of here, put it in a cup of the water that I was talking about before, not tap water, but my reverse osmosis water, and I will sit it in there so that I will let the damp sphagnum moss become damp again, basically. And that happens every 2 days in the summer. If I'm having particularly hot days, every day it needs that. And if it's a very, 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 very hot day, like the heat wave that we had it on there, I might have to do that twice in a day. So that is something to bear in mind. It is high maintenance in terms of that. In the winter time now, and obviously I'm keeping the temperature in here at between 15 and 20 degrees. Now that it's winter and energy crisis, this has meant that with this plant, I think at the moment I'm watering once every 3 to 4 days. So it's a bit better. And also I find in the winter, I can almost let the sphagnum moss go fully dry, pretty much, or at least what I can feel from the outside. I'm sure that there's still some dampness in the middle. But yeah, obviously this isn't a plant that I would say you're going to need to let the sphagnum moss go fully dry and turn into a brick. that would probably stress out this plant or potentially kill it as well. But also making sure you're not overwatering this one. And that's the slight intricacy and difference between this one and a lot of the other carnivorous plants is you could just say, well, I'm just going to water it every day, even in the winter, basically. This could rot out. That's the difference between this one and a lot of the other carnivorous plants. So just something to bear in mind there. So coming into final thoughts about this specific plant. And overall, let's do what I usually do and say, knowing what I know now, if I didn't have this plant, would I get this plant? Yes, I would. Not enthusiastically, purely because it's one more thing I need to do in my collection and it is a bit high maintenance. But other than the watering that I was talking about there, and maybe if I'd left it in the coco coir, maybe it could have gone for a bit longer. Correct me if that's how you've got yours growing and if it didn't have obviously the net pot. But do you then run into struggles of maybe it staying damp for too long and not getting enough air to the roots? Let me know, basically. But yeah, but other than that, and I will go on a ledge on this and say, for me, this was an easy, I'm not going to say the easiest carnivorous plant, but an easier carnivorous plant than I thought, especially because I think a lot of people get this plant and try to keep it happy and might kill it, and there's a lot of horror stories behind it. But I think if you just do a couple of things, it just needs a couple of really specific things to keep it happy, then it's happy. I don't fuss it in any way or form. It's still all right. It's still happy, basically. Light levels, I would say, it does need kind of bright indirect light or kind of almost leaning towards bright in the household. Obviously, if you've got this outside, you'd still want this to be in a shaded place, but yeah. And coming on to the final score between 0 and 1 being the worst and 10 being the best, how would I rate this plant? A 7 or an 8? So I mean, it's not, if you're just comfortable doing those couple of bits of really specific care for this one, man, it will just keep doing its own thing. I'm also not that precious about the pictures themselves being fully formed all the time. I've left them on here. I don't know whether or not you are meant to cut them at some point, and I've had situations where the pictures are almost still fully fine, and the leaves are starting to yellow. At that point, I'll just cut off the leaves, and you can see some of the lower leaves have been removed. But other than that, this has been a joy to grow actually so far. This one surprised me. I think this is probably one of my longest running carnivorous plants in my collection. I think there's one more Sarracenia that lives outdoors in the UK year round. Did not know you could do that, but it does now. So yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say about this. Hopefully you've enjoyed slightly different type of plant today, but again, this has been a viewer request by quite a lot of you. Again, surprised me quite how many people were really into this plant. But yeah, as always, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon, and I do hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.